Some weddings are beautiful, some are extravagant, some are unforgettable. But this wedding was about to become infamous. Because at exactly 3:47 p.m., in the middle of the most expensive wedding ceremony in Manhattan history, a woman walked through those cathedral doors. And in the 5 minutes that followed, she would destroy a billionaire, expose a decade of lies, and reveal a truth so shocking that everyone in that room would remember exactly where they were standing when it happened. This is that story, and I promise you, nothing will prepare you for how this ends. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment when everything still seemed perfect. The wedding of Victoria Chen and James Blackwood was supposed to be the social event of the decade, and why wouldn't it be? James Blackwood was a 42-year-old tech billionaire, founder and CEO of Blackwood Technologies, worth an estimated $8.3 billion. He was handsome in that refined way wealthy men often are. Tall, silver at the temples, always impeccably dressed. The kind of man who commanded attention the moment he walked into a room. Victoria Chen was 31, a successful corporate lawyer, beautiful and brilliant. She'd met James 2 years earlier at a charity gala. Their courtship had been the stuff of romance novels, private jets to Paris, weekends in the Maldives, a proposal on a yacht under the Mediterranean stars. They were perfect together. Everyone said so. The wedding was being held at St. Patrick's Cathedral, followed by a reception at the Plaza Hotel. 500 guests, an orchestra flown in from Vienna, flowers imported from Ecuador, a dress by Vera Wang that cost more than most people's houses. Every detail was flawless, because when you're marrying a billionaire, nothing less than perfection will do. I was there that day, not as a guest. I was covering it for the society pages of the New York Times. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I've covered hundreds of society weddings, but I've never seen anything like what happened that afternoon. The ceremony started at 3:30 p.m., right on schedule. The cathedral was breathtaking, white roses everywhere, thousands of them, candlelight making everything glow, a string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon as guests settled into the pews. The guest list read like a who's who of American power: tech CEOs, politicians, old money families, movie stars. Everyone who mattered was there, dressed in their finest, ready to witness this union of wealth and beauty and success. James stood at the altar, looking every bit the confident billionaire groom. His best man, his college roommate and CFO, David Sterling, stood beside him. The groomsmen were perfectly lined up. Everything was choreographed down to the second. The bridesmaids processed down the aisle, Victoria's sister, her college friends, all in elegant champagne-colored gowns. Then came the flower girl, James's niece, adorable in white lace, scattering rose petals. The music swelled. Everyone stood. The doors at the back of the cathedral opened, and Victoria appeared. She was stunning. The dress was a masterpiece, lace and silk, a cathedral train that seemed to flow forever. Her father, a prominent surgeon, stood beside him, beaming with pride. She was radiant, glowing with happiness. This was the moment every little girl dreams about, the moment Victoria had been planning for 18 months, the moment that would seal her future as Mrs. James Blackwood, wife of a billionaire, mistress of a life most people only see in movies. Victoria started down the aisle, slowly, gracefully. Everyone was smiling. Phones were discreetly out, capturing the moment. The photographer was clicking away. The videographer was recording every angle. Victoria was halfway down the aisle when I noticed something odd. James's expression had changed. The confident smile had vanished. He'd gone completely pale. His hands, which had been relaxed at his sides, were now clenched into fists. He was staring past Victoria, past everyone, at the doors of the cathedral. I turned to look. The doors were still open, and standing in the entrance, backlit by the afternoon sun, was a woman. She was thin, too thin, actually. Her hair was dark and pulled back severely. She wore a simple black dress, completely inappropriate for a wedding. No jewelry, no makeup. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. But what struck me most was her expression. She wasn't angry. She wasn't crying. She was just determined, like she'd come a very long way to be here, and nothing was going to stop her now. The music continued. Victoria kept walking, oblivious. Most of the guests hadn't noticed the woman yet. They were focused on the bride, as they should be. But James had noticed. David, the best man, had noticed. I saw him lean toward James and whisper something urgently. James shook his head slightly, but his face had gone from pale to ashen.
The woman started walking, not quickly, just steadily down the center aisle, right behind Victoria. Now people were noticing. Heads turned, whispers started. Who was this woman? Why was she here? Why was she walking down the aisle like she belonged there? Security noticed too. 2 men in dark suits at the back of the cathedral started moving toward her, but she ignored them, just kept walking with that same determined expression. Victoria had reached the altar. Her father kissed her cheek and stepped aside. She turned to face James, her smile brilliant, completely unaware of the woman now standing just 15 feet behind her. The priest opened his mouth to begin the ceremony, and that's when the woman spoke. Stop. One word, said quietly, but in the acoustics of that cathedral, it carried everywhere. The music stopped. The priest froze. Victoria turned around, confused. James looked like he might be sick. "Ma'am," one of the security guards said, reaching for the woman's arm, "you need to leave." "Don't touch me," the woman said, her voice steady. "I'm not leaving, not until I say what I came here to say." "Who are you?" Victoria asked, her voice sharp with indignation. This was her moment, her wedding, and this stranger was ruining it. The woman's eyes swept across the cathedral, all 500 guests staring at her, phones recording, the moment suspended in shocked silence. Then she looked at James, really looked at him, and for just a second I saw her mask crack, saw pain flash across her face, deep and raw. "Who am I?" she repeated, her voice getting stronger. "My name is Sarah Blackwood, and 10 years ago I married that man." The cathedral erupted. People gasped. Voices rose in shock and confusion. Victoria stumbled backward. James closed his eyes like he was in physical pain. "That's impossible," Victoria said, but her voice was shaking. "James, tell her that's impossible. Tell everyone." "I can't," James said quietly, and those 2 words confirmed everyone's worst suspicion. "You're lying." Victoria turned on the woman, on Sarah. "He would have told me if he was married. We did background checks. I've seen his records. He's not married." "Not legally," Sarah said. "Not anymore. He made sure of that. But 10 years ago, we stood in a small church in Vermont and said vows. We promised to love each other forever. We meant it. At least I meant it." She took a step closer to the altar. Security hesitated, unsure what to do. This wasn't a physical threat. This was something worse. A bomb made of words and secrets, and it was already detonating. "James and I met in college," Sarah continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral. "He was brilliant but broke, working 3 jobs to pay tuition. I was pre-med, also broke. We fell in love the way young people do, completely, recklessly. We got married the summer after graduation, 22 years old, stupid in love, thinking we could conquer the world together." Victoria was crying now, mascara running down her face, but she couldn't look away. None of us could. "For 5 years we built a life together," Sarah said. "We lived in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn. I worked as a medical researcher. James started his first company in our living room. We were happy, really happy. Poor, exhausted, eating ramen most nights, but happy. James still hadn't moved, hadn't defended himself, just stood there like a man facing execution. Then his company took off," Sarah continued. "Blackwood Technologies. His app went viral. Venture capital money started pouring in. Within 18 months, James went from broke to a millionaire. Within 3 years, a billionaire." She paused, and something in her expression hardened. "And that's when I became a problem." "Sarah," James finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Don't," Sarah cut him off. "Don't you dare speak to me like you care. You lost that right." She turned to address the guests, and I realized she was telling this story not just to Victoria, but to everyone. This was her moment to be heard, and she wasn't going to waste it. "See, when James was poor, I was perfect for him. A supportive wife who worked long hours so he could build his dream, who believed in him when nobody else did, who held him when the stress got too much, and told him he was going to make it." Her voice cracked slightly. "But when he became rich, suddenly I wasn't the right kind of wife anymore. I was too ordinary, too middle class. I didn't know the right people or wear the right clothes or say the right things at fancy parties. I was an embarrassment, a reminder of who he used to be before he became James Blackwood, billionaire." "That's not true," James said weakly, but everyone could hear the lie in his voice. "Isn't it?" Sarah's eyes blazed. "Then explain why you asked me for a divorce 8 years ago, why you told me our marriage." Why you offered me $2 million to sign the papers quickly and quietly and disappear from your life. The guests were dead silent. Seattle. Tried to rebuild my life. And I did, actually. I finished my medical degree, became a doctor, worked in underserved communities, made peace with the fact that the man I loved had chosen his empire over our marriage. She took a deep breath. And then, 3 months ago, I got a call from a lawyer, James's lawyer, telling me there was a problem with our divorce. This was news to everyone. Victoria's face went from tears to confusion. James closed his eyes again. Turns out, Sarah said, her voice dripping with bitter irony, our divorce was never finalized. A technicality, some paperwork that was never properly filed. The lawyer assured me it was just a clerical error, easily fixed. He asked me to sign some new documents to make it official. She pulled a folded paper from her dress pocket. These documents, which I was supposed to sign 3 weeks ago. She held them up. Except I noticed something interesting. The date on the divorce decree was backdated to make it look like we'd been divorced 9 years ago instead of the 8 years we actually filed. Murmurs rippled through the cathedral. I was scribbling notes frantically, my journalist brain on fire. This was huge. This was massive. Why would they backdate it? Sarah asked rhetorically. Why would it matter if we divorced 8 years ago or 9? So I did some digging, made some calls, found out some very interesting information. She looked directly at James, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. 9 years ago, James started a charitable foundation, the Blackwood Foundation for Medical Research. Very generous, very public, very good for his image. Sarah's voice was steady but cold. And to get the tax benefits he wanted, to structure it the way his lawyers advised, he needed to be unmarried. Needed to have been unmarried for at least a year before establishing it. Understanding dawned across the crowd. David, the best man, put his hand over his face. But he was still married to me, Sarah continued, which meant that foundation, which has received millions in donations, which has claimed millions in tax deductions, was established fraudulently by a married man claiming to be single. The implications crashed over the cathedral like a wave. Tax fraud, donor fraud, a scandal that could destroy not just James's reputation, but his entire empire. So the lawyers tried to fix it quietly, Sarah said. Backdate the divorce, make it look like he'd been single all along, cover up the fraud before anyone noticed. And I was supposed to just sign the papers and let them rewrite history. She looked at Victoria with something that might have been pity. But then I found out about you, about this wedding, about the fact that James was about to marry another woman while our divorce still wasn't even legally finalized, while he was technically still my husband. Victoria made a strangled sound. Her father, the surgeon, had his arm around her, holding her up. So I had a choice, Sarah said. Sign the papers. Let James have his perfect new life with his perfect new wife. Let him erase me from his history. Or, she paused, letting the word hang in the air. Or, come here, refuse to sign, and make sure everyone knows the truth, that James Blackwood, billionaire philanthropist, built his charitable empire on fraud, that he's about to commit bigamy, that his entire perfect life is built on lies. James finally found his voice. Sarah, please, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Sarah said, and now her voice was shaking with emotion. I understand that you threw away our marriage the moment it became inconvenient. I understand that you erased me from your life story like I never existed. I understand that you were willing to commit fraud, to risk everything, rather than just be honest about having had a previous wife who wasn't society page material. Tears were streaming down her face now. And I understand that you never loved me the way I loved you. Because if you had, you never could have done this. Never could have reduced our 5 years together to a problem to be fixed with backdated paperwork. The cathedral was absolutely silent, except for the sound of Sarah crying. And I realized that this wasn't just about exposing James. This was about a woman whose heart had been broken so thoroughly that she'd spent 3 months deciding whether revenge was worth destroying her own peace. And she'd decided it was. So here's what's going to happen, Sarah said, wiping her eyes and standing straighter. I'm not signing your papers. Our divorce stands as filed 8 years ago, which means it's not final yet.
Which means you're still married to me, which means this wedding cannot legally happen. Victoria collapsed into her father's arms, sobbing. And tomorrow morning, Sarah continued, I'm going to the IRS and the Attorney General and every journalist who'll listen. And I'm going to tell them everything about your fraudulent foundation, about how you lied on legal documents, about how you've been claiming tax benefits you weren't entitled to, about all of it. James had gone from pale to red. You'll destroy everything I've built. Yes, Sarah said simply, I will. The way you destroyed everything we built. The way you destroyed me. She looked at him with something like sadness mixed with satisfaction. "You threw me away like I was nothing, James. Offered me $2 million like that could compensate for 5 years of my life, for believing in you, for loving you. You thought you could erase me, make me disappear into your past like I never mattered." She turned to leave, then looked back one more time. "But I mattered, James. I was real. Our marriage was real. And you don't get to just rewrite history because it's inconvenient. You don't get to have your perfect new life built on lies about your old one." Sarah Blackwood walked back down that aisle, the same aisle Victoria had walked down 20 minutes earlier, full of joy and hope. Security didn't try to stop her this time. The guests parted like water, nobody quite meeting her eyes, but everyone watching her go. She reached the doors of the cathedral, paused, then disappeared into the Manhattan afternoon, leaving behind the wreckage of a wedding that would never be completed and a billionaire whose empire was about to crumble. For a moment, nobody moved. The scene was frozen. Victoria collapsed and crying, James standing at the altar looking destroyed, 500 guests in shock, a priest with no idea what to do next. Then the spell broke. Voices erupted. Phones were out, not taking photos now, but making calls. Journalists were running for the doors. Wedding guests were trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Security was talking urgently into radios. I watched Victoria's father help her up, watched her stumble toward the side exit, her Vera Wang dress trailing behind her like a wounded angel. I watched James's best man grab his arm, hissing something urgent about lawyers and damage control. And I watched James Blackwood stand alone at that altar, surrounded by thousands of white roses and candles and all the trappings of his perfect billionaire wedding, and realized that everything he built, the empire, the reputation, the carefully crafted image, was about to come crashing down. All because of a woman he'd tried to erase, a woman he thought he could pay to disappear, a woman who'd loved him once and had been discarded when that love became inconvenient. The aftermath was swift and brutal. By the next morning, Sarah had indeed gone to the authorities. The investigation into James's foundation began immediately. The backdated documents, the fraud, the tax implications, it was all exactly as Sarah had described. Within a week, James resigned as CEO of Blackwood Technologies. The board had no choice. The scandal was too big, the legal exposure too severe. His net worth plummeted as stocks clashed and investigations multiplied. Victoria, understandably, never spoke to him again. The engagement was off before the sun set on what should have been their wedding day. Last I heard, she'd moved to London and refused to ever speak about James Blackwood publicly. The foundation was dissolved. Millions in donations had to be returned. Criminal charges were filed. James eventually pleaded guilty to tax fraud and received a sentence of 18 months in federal prison, along with millions in fines. His empire didn't completely collapse. He was still wealthy, though nowhere near billionaire status anymore. But his reputation, his carefully cultivated image as a philanthropist and visionary, destroyed utterly. And Sarah? She went back to Seattle, back to her work as a doctor. I managed to get one interview with her, about a month after the wedding that wasn't. "Do you regret it?" I asked her, exposing him, destroying everything he built. Sarah thought about it for a long moment. "I regret that it came to that," she said finally. "I regret that he couldn't just be honest, that he valued his image more than the truth, that he thought he could erase me." She looked out the window of her small Seattle apartment. Nothing like the penthouse James had lived in, but comfortable, filled with books and plants and evidence of a real life. "But do I regret stopping that wedding, making sure everyone knew the truth?" She turned back to me. "No, because he was about to do to Victoria what he did to me, build a life with her while hiding who he really was. And she deserved to know, deserved to see who she was really marrying before it was too late."
"Was it worth it?" I asked. "The revenge?" Sarah smiled sadly. "It wasn't revenge. Revenge would have been about hurting him. This was about making sure the truth came out, about making sure I wasn't just erased from history, like I never existed, like those 5 years never mattered." She paused, then added quietly, "And maybe it was about saving Victoria from making the biggest mistake of her life. I loved James once. I know what it's like to believe in him, to think he's something he's not. At least now she knows the truth. She gets to build her life on honesty, even if that honesty hurt." That was 2 years ago. James served his time and was released 6 months ago. He keeps a low profile now. No more society events, no more headlines. Just a man who learned the hard way that you can't build an empire on lies forever. Eventually, the truth comes out. And it often comes out at the worst possible moment. Like 3:47 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon, in a cathedral full of white roses, at the moment when everything seems perfect. Until she walks in. The woman you tried to erase. The truth you tried to hide. The path